In the tent. I wish we'd never gone to the circus when I was little. My younger brother Clyde and I adored it when we were kids. It was a small traveling circus, and my dad, the master of community events, knew it came to our part of the country every summer. It was always in the same location, right at the outskirts of town. My family lived in a more rural area, so this was our highlight of the season. Dad would buy 4 tickets for us in advance and get them when they were at their cheapest price. The circus itself didn't start until after dark, but he liked to drive us there early to get the most out of the night. Whenever we'd park, the sun was still setting. The staff was finishing their setup, but the second we walked to the gate, a smell of hot buttered popcorn and fresh cotton candy tickled our noses. There wasn't much to do at first, but the food was ready without fail when we arrived. The funnel cakes were Dad's favorite, so he'd lead us around the circus grounds to buy one for Mom and himself and another for Clyde and me to split. Clyde would skip along the barren ground right behind Dad. From the toothy, rosy-cheeked grin on his face, it was no secret that he loved the funnel cake as much as Dad. Mom didn't have quite the same enthusiasm as the rest of us, though. She'd be walking behind us, distracted by the big striped tents. Mom was watching the staff feed the caged animals one last time before the show. She had a fascination with them, the elephants more so than the rest. A smile always came to her face when she'd ask, "Are we going to go see Zeus and Hera soon?" "Not yet, dear," Dad replied, "but the show's about to start soon." The 4 of us would stand near the funnel cake stand, and Dad, Clyde, and I stuffed our faces every time like clockwork. So what if it was a little too hot? That never mattered. Clyde and I loved the powdered sugar the most. But while we were brushing the little bits of it off our shirts, I noticed Mom's fixation. While she'd been working on her funnel cake, Mom was looking elsewhere. She was watching the clowns right outside their tent. It was the first time any of us had seen them before the show itself. There was a look of quiet unease across her face. Her hands were trembling, and she stopped eating. She turned to Dad and asked, "Can we go sit down somewhere?" Pointing to the other side of the circus grounds, she said, "Let's go over there and eat. Can we?" He didn't say anything at first, but nodded and said, "Sure." The clowns were outside their tent, as if they were waiting for their cue. They were in full costume, large smiles painted and gnarled across their face. A lot of them were older. All of them had hair whiter than snow, extended out, layered in sweat and grease. But they weren't wigs, and it wasn't dyed. Their hair was colored white all the way down to the roots. They weren't all the same age, though. While some ranged from their 20s, all the way into their 50s, others were younger. A couple of them shorter than 4 feet. Their bodies still had full lips and little bits of fat one would see on a child. Yet the bags under their eyes drooped down as if they hadn't slept in weeks. Their eyes were unnaturally pale, riddled with protruding blood vessels. The skin on their faces were wrinkled, crackling and dried like tree bark. But among all the clowns, they had the same look across their faces. Their common gaze was decayed stone, piercing into something far beyond the circus grounds. They were still, inanimate like objects. As more people gradually walked in the gates and the sun grew dimmer, there was a gentle thud-thud of footsteps from within the clown's tent. It was the sound of footsteps edging closer to the outside. Inside the tent was an array of flickering candlelight, surrounding the tall, lumbering shadow of whomever stood near the edge. It was oddly tall, lanky along most of its body, with a thick, bulbous hunch at the top of its back. It had a crooked, pointed beard and an elongated nose. Atop its scraggly head of hair was an extended, thin top hat that bent down just like the figure's spine. The figure never uttered a syllable. It just reached out an arm that had to have been most of the body length, and we could see its hand stretch outside the tent. The skin was white as the clown's faces, and translucent as if suffering from an extreme anemia. It was sprinkled with pale boils, with elongated yellow curled fingernails. As it extended its fingers, the clowns turned. All at once, they faced the 4 of us. Their expressions hadn't changed, nor did their eyes look away. But they didn't stand there for long. The figure in the tent turned its hand to make a beckoning gesture. The clowns turned to it at once and drifted inside. Dad took Mom by the hand and led us away. We were sitting at a different part of the grounds. Clyde and I were watching our parents. We could see Mom shivering in one of the chairs left for the audience members near the gate. The area was becoming more crowded, dense groups of people buying popcorn, cotton candy and funnel cakes, and playing carnival games around the tents. But we didn't participate in the games this year at all. All that mattered was Mom. Clyde and I didn't say anything, but we heard their murmured conversation. "You okay, dear?" Dad asked. "I don't know, it's just the clowns. One of them really got me." "What do you mean?" The look across his face only grew more skewed with worry as she answered, "One of the little ones. I can't tell if they're really kids, but darling, you're gonna think I'm crazy." "No, not at all. What was it?" "One of the girls. Somehow she looked familiar." "Familiar?" "Yeah, like one of the kids I used to play with as a kid." "It's probably a little deja vu." "I wish we could leave," Mom whispered. "Just the clowns and that man in the tent. I don't know how to explain it." "Try." A moment of silence, and she replied, "No, it's probably nothing. It's just my imagination, that's all. And I don't want to ruin it for the boys. They love coming here." My biggest regret was always the fact that I didn't say anything. If only I spoke up. If only I told her that she wasn't imagining things. If only I told her that I saw it too, the tragedy wouldn't have happened. Even to this day, I couldn't help feeling the guilt as if it was my fault. Once the circus music sounded off, the smaller crowds joined together and went inside the big tent. Mom stood up with a little assuring smile, telling Dad she'd be okay. We followed the crowds into the big tent and took our seats. As always, the first part of the show was the lights. A dazzling aurora of sparkling colors burst from the center of the show to engulf and illuminate the entire tent. Out of the whole audience, my brother was taken the most by them. The smile on his face was bigger than ever. He was standing up, cheering with his arms up in the air. My parents looked over and grinned with Clyde before gesturing him to sit back down. Once the lights were settled and still, the clowns ran to their circular stage, performing somersaults, backflips, and all sorts of acrobatics. The smiles of sheer delight on their faces were contagious. Cheers spread across the entire big top as they waved to the audience. And when they brought out Zeus and Hera, and all the other animals, the worry on Mom's face dissipated. The audience was amazed to see the clowns balancing on the tips of the elephants' trunks and escalating to more daring acrobatics. First, there'd only be one clown, then they'd link hands with a second, lifting them into the air. The second would be upside down, extending their legs out and balancing with perfection. Then a third would stand on the second's feet, and so on until 6 clowns made a chain on each trunk. The audience was in an uproar of applause. Clyde was standing on his chair, bouncing on the balls of his feet. He cheered as loudly as he could, clapping his little hands above his head. When it was all over, the massive crowd was dispersed into the nighttime chill around the big top. They split up, flocking to food stands and carnival games. On our way to the popcorn stand, I caught something in the corner of my eye. At first it looked like a white and blue blur, but when I turned, one of the clowns was standing a short distance from us. It was one of the taller, middle-aged ones. He wore a bright blue and white shirt with sky-colored pom-poms and indigo gloves. He had the same dead stare in his colorless, wrinkled face as he did before the show. Tufts of pure white hair sprung out in all directions, and an oversized, gnarled smile was painted over his fixed grimace. The clown was clearly breathing, but the rest of his body was still as he gazed at us. Other people in the crowds didn't notice him. They were too occupied getting in line for games and food. I grabbed Clyde's hand and followed our parents. As we squeezed through clusters of people, he had trouble keeping up. It felt as if he were being weighed down. I tried pulling a little harder, but it didn't make him pick up the pace. By the time we reached the stand, I felt his hand let go of mine. He had to have been straight behind us at that point. There was no way he could have gotten lost. Yet through the crowds, I barely heard a high-pitched wail echoing from the distance. I turned around. There was no sight of the clown, and there was also no Clyde. I shouted his name and looked through the crowds, but he wasn't anywhere to be seen. I tugged on Dad's shirt as he ordered 3 large bags of popcorn. When I told him Clyde was gone, he searched the crowds, shouting his name. Mom took my hand, and the 2 of us followed, calling Clyde's name with him. We had trouble keeping up with him, but were as frantic as him. We searched through the crowd for hours until the midnight sky set in, chilling us to the bones. The rest of the audiences drifted from the circus grounds to their cars and back on the streets. As the highways filled with pairs of glowing off-white eyes, we stopped at a somewhat nearby motel, and Dad called the police. A search went on for weeks, and I told them about all the clowns. We heard the circus itself was put under suspicion, but nothing ever came of it. The police said that despite their thorough investigation, they couldn't find any leads for Clyde's whereabouts. The years passed, and a lot of us accepted the probable reality of Clyde's abduction. We didn't expect to see him again. We quietly mourned the loss, but it didn't stop Mom or anybody else from clinging on to hope. Clyde was always a smart boy, Mom would say. There are stories of little kids who escaped from being kidnapped. I'm willing to bet Clyde was one of them. We never denied the chance. It gave us a spoonful of hope that eased us like medicine. We'd smile and tell her that it was possible, but for all we knew, he could have started a life of his own. We even hoped that at some point, Clyde would find his way home. But the years went by, and no Clyde. Yet Mom never let go of hope. She even started taking the car just to take a long drive. She'd pay for the gas and everything, but once Mom said she wandered out of the state and back, the intention was obvious. I think it was relieving to get away sometimes, but at the core of it, she was quietly searching for my little brother. But my adulthood crept in, and still nothing. It was odd to look back at the black and white pictures of Clyde and think this little kid with pudgy cheeks, freckles, blue eyes, and jet black hair would have been an uncle. The years became decades, and old age set in. The children grew up and made me a grandparent. I hate to admit it, but there were even moments where I forgot what Clyde used to look like. Thank God I saved my family's old scrapbook in my attic. It served as a wonderful reminder. Sooner or later, the grandkids were almost big enough to start going to school soon. The memories of what happened to Clyde began to fade. I remembered that he went missing when we were kids, but the why and how? The details got fuzzy whenever I tried to recall any of it. The grandkids started staying over for an entire month every summer. It was a great way to spend time with them outside of the holidays, and the weather was always fantastic. So visiting the nearby park and the playgrounds became an instant favorite of theirs. I even showed them the nearby creek and taught them how to fish. We were all so proud of them when they caught their first fish. The pictures of them holding up their catches went right into a brand new scrapbook. But this one would be all the memories of them growing into adulthood. The summer before the grandkids were supposed to start school, we wanted to make it special. We wanted to do something a little different. The idea of a theme park was brought up, but they were still too little to go on most of the rides. Roller coasters would have been better when they were closer to being in 4th grade because they'd be tall enough to go on all the rides. But I had an idea. Warm memories of the circus I went to as a kid resurfaced. I was pretty new to using the internet, but something called Google turned out to be pretty handy. It only took a minute to find out that not only were there traveling circuses still going on, but the name of that one that I saw as a kid came up in one of the first search results. I remembered feeling a bit uneasy about the clowns, but couldn't pinpoint why. As a kid, I was pretty easy to scare. Until the age of 7, I believed a monster haunted my closet at night. So it wasn't a stretch that the clowns would spook me too. I bought tickets for the whole family, and to start off the month where the grandkids stayed, we went to the circus. The parking lot that night was crowded, blanketed over in a chilling darkness. The cloud-embraced moon was glaring down at the family like an enormous white eye. When we walked up to the ticket booth, the grandkids skipped ahead of us. They weren't out of our sight, but trying to catch up was a cold reminder of old age. As we waited in line to get in, I looked around and peered over the dense crowd of people. Once I handed in our crisp new tickets and got the stubs back, I handed them out to the family. I gave a little reminder to everyone to keep the stubs on them until we leave, just in case. When we got in, I looked around and noticed something, one of the clowns nearby. I couldn't help being mesmerized by his height and facial features. His eyes were encircled by deep bags like he hadn't slept in forever. The blue irises were horribly pale. His skin was crinkled and dry like the bark on a tree. Yet his cheeks were pudgy and the lips were full like a child's. His little nose was covered in freckles, and his mouth was painted over with a wide, blue, gnarled smile that twisted across his face. It matched his striped blue and white, baggy outfit. His hair was an absolute white, pure as the moon and extending out in all directions. My lower lip quivered in black fear when all the memories flooded back like a tidal wave. I felt my eyes sting with hot tears as I recognized the little clown. Everyone else didn't seem to think he was part of the circus. They all went around him and remarked that he must have been a really big fan of the show. Some wondered where his parents must have been, but didn't worry much. The words were stuck in my throat, but I finally managed to utter something out. Clyde? At first, there was no response, but the clown shifted his head to face me. His eyes gaze pierced into me with that 1,000-yard stare. The dead, hollow look across his face hadn't changed a bit. The old, familiar music boomed all throughout the circus, and his face changed. He suddenly turned on like a light switch. A giggling lightning bolt of excitement surged through his entire body. The amused crowds cleared a path for him as he ran towards the center stage. He was laughing and performing an array of somersaults and backflips all the way there.